Welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience podcast, the podcasts where we have candid conversations with women sharing their amazing career journeys. This woman is a powerhouse who needs no introduction. She's a TEDx speaker, co-founder of businesses, has grown leading businesses from 0 to 100 in terms of revenue, space, and we're here to have a conversation that not only talks about her career spanning continents and industries, but going from a large business to the startup and also what she's doing now, which just shows it's never too late to reinvent yourself. Annabelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Natola. I really, really appreciate it. Great to kind of get into this conversation.
I know, because it's an interesting conversation, because you could even title the podcast From Corporate to Startup, From Hong Kong to London to Pool. Your journey has been so interesting. You've done such amazing things. Your LinkedIn just reads in terms of achievements. But for the woman in the audience who is looking at your profile, looking at you and saying, how did I get there? Can we just talk about your journey, how you started and what led you to get into retail in the first place?
Yeah, so actually, we can blame my mum. I don't know if blame's the right word. We can credit my mum for my journey into retail. I grew up in London. Most of my friends kind of ended up, I don't know how it happened. There's like a summer where everybody ended up working on the King's Road. It was just a place to be, I guess. If you grew up in Southwest London, that's kind of where everybody ended up working for a summer. And I was working at Jane Ash's cake shop, which is just off the corner of the King's Road. But my mum had a flower shop there, and she'd come home with these things in the fridge, which like in a yellow bag and a white pot. And she's like, "Don't eat them." And I was like, "What on earth have you put in the fridge that I can't eat? Like that's a bit of an odd thing." And she's like, "Oh no, they're face masks from this new like odd shop that's open on the King's Road. And I think you should go and try and get a job there." And so I did, and like that was Lush. That was 1998. And yeah, it was a huge amount of fun. Back there, you were just kind of, the King's Road was in that bit of that vibe phase, which is kind of a bit of a shame. It's a bit revitalized these days, but, it's a bit of a shame to see where it's gone, to be honest, like historically. But at that time, you had like, the likes of Madonna and like all these like really super famous people just walking around that shop. So it was just a super buzzy place to be, regardless of the retail that you ended up working in. And then Lush was this super new, very different, and the smell obviously was probably one of the most iconic things aside from everything. People coming in thinking, "Oh, does it look like cheese?" Which is always super fun. But so that kind of like got me into retail at a very early days, but I wasn't actually intending to go into retail. That wasn't the plan. I was going to study geography at university. I knew this at a really young age because my grandfather was a farmer and he'd kind of really worked on that organic farming principles at a really young. And so I was super passionate about human geography, actually, in particular. And I was like, I'm going to go and work for the UN and be a humanitarian officer. That was the dream job. And then I ended up working at Lush, and then you got to see some of the real world practice a business could have on some of the things that I was super passionate about in terms of, human rights and animal welfare and environmental protection. And so I guess the love of all of those things was kind of entrenched within a business that I sort of joined, and then grew, I guess, from there.
That's so interesting. So you're the classic, I started off on the shop floor and rose through the ranks, which, it's still something to be proud of, because we do have the juxtaposition of people who change businesses every 2 years and through there they grow. But you were the classic, started on the shop floor, grew through the ranks. And when you were talking about King's Road, I was there actually a few weeks ago, and I'm always trying to see how retail has changed and what the landscape is going to be. And it's interesting where it's still a lot of, activewear brands, things going on, more boutique-y style, but probably the buzz that was there in the 90s is maybe trying to come back. Time will tell where it actually ends.
I agree. I mean, they definitely have done quite a lot of land redevelopment projects up like towards Peter Jones. And then obviously Anthropology took a really big site across Waitrose, and that kind of like really helped redevelop the area. But you've still got shops that were there, like really small independent stores that were there when I worked on the on the King's Road in 1998, and they're still there. And how amazing is that to see in retail, especially in today's world where, so many of these retailers just get bolstered off business rates. The realities of running retail is hard work. So super impressive to see some of those businesses still alive on the King's Road.
Oh yeah, definitely. We love the independence because that's what actually gets you there. It's a meetup point. It's a landmark. It what gets you going. But going back to your career, so started off at Lush, which has been the pinnacle and sort of defined your career till now. You've done lots of things. You've lived in different countries, which, for some is a very big feat to move your whole family or your whole ecosystem to go to
Mm.
another country. When was that a pivotal moment? So you started on the shop floor, rose through the ranks. At what point did you think, right, I could actually do this and go to another country? Because there are women out there who are thinking, job market is tough. Do I just look in the current market as it is, or do I consider other countries, other territories? Was there like a checklist that you went through to say, this is something I want to do, or once again, serendipity or leaning into spontaneity? Which one was it?
Probably, well, I think I was very determined I was going to work abroad. So I knew that pretty early on. And at the time, it was 2012, just when I moved to Hong Kong. My husband had been working on the Olympics in London. And there was this whole conversation about getting on the Olympic train. So the Olympic train, basically, you kind of do back to back Olympics. And it's like, are we going to follow you and go on the Olympic train? And I was like, oh, Rio's next. That sounds great. And then he was like, yeah, but Sochi is before Rio. And I was like, Sochi, to Olympics in Sochi, amazing in Russia. But at the time, Lush had partners in Russia anyway. So, and this whole kind of way of working remotely just didn't exist. So the idea that I could have worked in Russia for Lush was, that wasn't going to happen. So it would have been I would have left the business at that point. And then I had spent the better half of probably the 2 years prior, maybe 3 before that, working really with the international markets, whether or not that was supporting markets or looking at new market entry. So for places like India or Brazil, and then also looking at where partners wanted to sell back their businesses maybe to the group. And then I would look over that and support the M&A transaction. And then often they're the partners that actually lead the businesses locally. So then you have to recruit a new local team effectively to kind of like be put in and then run the business kind of future forward and then kind of handhold them a bit. We'd had a business out in Hong Kong, and actually I had spent a considerable amount of time in the prior 2 years looking at a lot of the competing businesses in Hong Kong, and particularly L'Occitane and how well they did out of the market. So just taking a kind of quick step back, one of the things I was trained on very early days at my time at Lush, and specifically working with a particular senior individual there, was going through accounts in meticulous detail. So I'm not a finance person, that I'm not an accountant, that is not my trained bag. But basically I was kept giving these tasks of like, go through these accounts and tell me what you see. And I'd sort of go through the accounts and then be like, oh, this is what I see. And then he'd be like, no, like this, look at it again. And then it was kind of through time and kind of continuation, you kind of really start to understand what's sort of in accounts and how much information about a company actually exists online, just publicly, if you start looking. But it was from there that I had spent a lot of time looking at the sales volume of L'Occitane out of Hong Kong. And they, at the time, they were getting around 2 million sterling out of each retail outlet from what we could see on the accounts. And in comparison, that just wasn't anywhere near what Lush was getting out from a retail store. And the businesses were quite comparable at that point. So I was like, there's a huge opportunity here. We're obviously missing it. Let's have a look at it. And then we had a partner there, and their license came to an end. But there was a bit of a legal case towards the end of that. And then I had to basically step in at a point where the whole business was going to collapse, basically, effectively. We'd had a partnership, like a franchise agreement there, all the stores, all the staff, everything was going to go. And then I was going to have to pick it up, basically, and then reopen the business kind of from scratch. And I basically, as soon as I'd sort of seen this potentially come onto the table a few months before, I was like, no, I want to go and do that. I want to go and do Hong Kong. My husband had never been to Hong Kong. So I basically signed the two of us up to like go and move abroad to a country we're going. Yeah, he'd never been to. And just hope when he got there, he didn't hate the choice I had just made for the two of us, which was wild when you think about it. I mean, what a legend. Just kind of be like, sure, let's go. And so yeah, so we went, and I remember at the time the CEO Mark had said to me, "You sure you don't want to go to Brazil?" So I'd spent probably about 2 years working on Brazil, and I had done my MBA as well. Imperial College. And when I was doing my MBA, I actually supported Brazil was one of the markets we ended up going to as a class, basically, on our assignment. So I actually spent quite a bit of time there. But I knew in my heart I've always wanted to be in Asia. You know, when you just like there's something intrinsically about like there's a cultural connection some ways. Like when I grew up, anecdotally, when I was at primary school, for some reason I was in a really small primary school class of like 10 kids because they had to divide the class. They had one really big class at 30, and then they just put 10 of us into a separate class, and there was like 6 kids that were from Japan, and my best friend ended up being Aya, and she's from Japan, and I just became obsessed with everything that was Japanese at a very, very young age. And so I'd always had this dream that I was going to go to Asia, and then my brother beat me to it and moved to Japan before I had a chance to. So I was like, right, as soon as the opportunity came available, I was like, right, let's go. And so we did. So I think in that space it was really about I saw an opportunity and I wanted it. And so I just put myself out there and was like, can I go? And the business said yes. And so I was like, right then, let's go. So we took an investment from the group to make it a wholly owned market. And we went, and I think I was back and forth there like literally every week for about 3 months. So I can't even tell you how exhausting that is flying economy, because when you're back and forth every other week. I remember almost crying. I got back on a Friday and was told I needed to fly back literally the Monday. And I had the same flight crew that flew in with me that flew back, and they're like, "Oh, hi, you're back again. This is very like," and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, I know." Like, I'll just become part of your crew. And so you just sort of like constantly on that pace. But I think as soon as I had decided we were going, it was great fun to then start looking at like, okay, let's go find somewhere to live and do all of those things, which, ordinarily could be daunting for someone, but at the time was great. And I think I do take in the fact that I was in a privileged position in the essence that, one, my company was moving me, which is different, I think, to sort of taking a leap out and looking for something independently of your own business. And two, at that point, we didn't have kids. And moving with children is completely different to moving to being like just a couple, because there's so many other considerations you just have to have. And I've moved back with children, and I understand those in a completely different way. So, but I would say that looking for opportunities globally is one of the massive benefits of today's modern world, and particularly post-COVID. So one of the people that I have been working with just recently in marketing, she's based in India. She'd actually been over here on studying, and then she had basically left to go back home to India, but she'd reached out to me having seen me do another like talk and wanted to work with me. And so I've been working with her, and she's fab. And like, you just think you don't actually have to even be geographically now in the place anyway. You can just operate in a much more globalized fashion. And what an amazing opportunity that is, not just for yourself, but for other people or people you could connect yourself with, and cultures, and understanding things in different ways, but also for the future, for our future generations of children coming up, what that will mean for them when they come into the workspace. And it's not so limited only by the current territory of which you are resident in.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I want to unpick there. Just 4 things stood out for me. So the first thing of working with a senior leader who said, read the numbers because they tell the story of a business, that resonates so much with me. And that is make or break for anyone who wants to rise within the ranks within a business. If you understand the financials, if you're cool with the finance, guys, you understand the story of a business, and also understand your competitors when you're trying to make decisions about whether to expand in that market or whether to leave a market. Or another thing which a very famous non-exec said to me was, there's no such thing as cannibalization. He truly believes that they can be more popcorn brands, more coffee shops, more soap brands, more perfume brands. He says there is more than enough space for lots of businesses to exist as long as you have a customer to serve that. So That was really interesting. And then the second bit about, moving countries. I love the fact that you said, well, Asia was your friend, and then obviously your best friend is from Japan, then your brother moving there. That also helps, in a way, if you've got like that circle to lean into. Because my family's some of them have been based in Europe, some have been based in Asia. But I remember one of them saying, if you move to Australia, we're not going to follow you because it's just it's like a long, it's first of all, it's very expensive. And then also it's just a long haul. So that decision of, okay, in order for my close circle to be able to reach me, is it a commutable distance, in terms of
Yeah.
flights, 7 hours, not 20 hours and $4,000. But I think that's really important, isn't it? To lean into, it feels like, I know you said finance, you're not a finance person and it's not your strength, but it feels like that's one of the things with your MBA attached to it that help you to be able to navigate operating and managing a business, which is essentially what you were
Yeah.
sent there to do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely did. I think the discipline, I mean, still today, I go to bed reading people's accounts. Like
I
that
do
is
the
just,
same as
it's not,
well. I'll see what's in the headlines and then I'll go on just to say, right, what are the financials actually saying? I even listen to podcasts that talk about, the EBIT and the operating profit, the investments, because I want to understand what's actually happening here.
yeah. And it's so fascinating. Like even just from like I was co-working Finisterre, which is like they've just opened a new co-working space here in Poole, and I was co-working in their space the other day. And a friend of mine actually modelled for them out in Canada, and I was just like, oh, this is super fascinating. I don't really know much about this company. I'll just go and read their accounts. So then I just got lost in their accounts, like, and I just was like, oh, it's so interesting, and there's so much information, especially today. And also, when you look at the ability to power that now with AI, so even if you're not financially completely literate, you just take that information out, you put it into ChatGPT, and you just go, give this to me in layman terms, explain this to me in a way conceptually that I can understand. And it does. And so even if there's like language in changes, you can find out quite considerable amounts of money. And that's actually super interesting. So like if you're someone, I think particularly important if you're an employee of a company.
Mm.
I know this is not something like a lot of people think about, but if you're an employee of a company, you absolutely should be going to Companies House and you should be looking at your company's accounts, not just their company accounts. You should be reading their articles of association. You should be reading any changes to their articles of association. Why? Because if you want to be a future part of this business and you're banking your career on this company, you need to understand if it's in a healthy position or not. And the only way to really understand that for you, if you don't have access to people's cash flow, is actually going into the accounts and actually looking at them, what changes are being made there for the company. It's completely fascinating what you can find out. So that would be one of the things that I'm glad I was taught early on. It's definitely something I will be teaching my children if you're going to be an employee of an entity. And I think it's something that should be taught much more readily, not just in MBA practice, but, during like when you're studying at A levels, or, really understanding some of the basic metrics of finance and finance accounting, just even for your own self, let alone, within the context of a business. As we know, businesses are very fragile in today's modern environment, and you could find yourself caught out if you don't actually understand what's happening within a company.
Oh yeah, and if for a lot of people that is the case, when you hear of businesses filing for bankruptcy or insolvency or having to make redundancies, a lot of them say, well, we didn't know. We thought the business was doing well because revenue was this. But actually, if you looked at the numbers, you would see the story once again of what was happening. But yeah, we hope, especially for those coming out, which is why podcasts like this are really good, for you to say that is an out Trailblazer tip there, understand the financial health of the company or the people who you're working with. That is a really good one. Annabelle, so you're
Oh,
a woman in executive leadership. What challenges have you faced? Obviously, you've told us the story of rising through the ranks, but we do know there are challenges being a leader. What would you say have been perhaps the biggest challenges that you have faced, and how have you navigated them with resilience and clarity?
I think potentially it wasn't the most important, like the biggest challenge I faced, but something that stuck with me, I guess one thing from a very early time. When I started working at Lush on the shop floor, I went through that really awkward phase of having severe acne. So I was 16, severe acne, in a cosmetic shop might not be the greatest combination, but I'd already been working there for a few months. I was working on the shop floor and a customer had come in and made a comment to my manager that I was not suitable to be working in a cosmetic shop because of my skin. And my manager stuck up for me and was like, no, she's great. She knows what she's talking about. She's well trained, you know. But you realize in those moments how vulnerable you are to something that's so, especially for women, you're so inherently sometimes judged based on how you look. And I'm sure maybe that would have been the similar case for someone, you know, who was a man as well, like with acne in a cosmetics environment, maybe that would have been the same. But then at the end, towards the end of my journey at Lush, I had heard a comment that someone had made about me from previous years, who not worked with me for 10 or 15 years, but had said that I was attractive, and that is why I rose through the business. And that's why I had a successful career in the company, was because of the way that I looked. And I just thought, how interesting is it? I started my journey basically being told I was not attractive enough to work on the shop floor because I had acne, or like, you know, to then end, you know, sort of towards the end of my career, then to hear that people would make a comment about the fact that the only reason why I did well in the company was because they deemed me to be attractive. And I think that level of judgment, and it came from another woman, both cases, that level of judgment is so damaging. And I think that when you think about a challenge, so like, you know, like surely it's enough about just turning up and doing your job. But no, we're faced with all these other challenges that get thrown at you, which is basically, you know, do you aesthetically live up to whatever it is that someone's got a predisposed mind of what you should be, but don't be
I think
too
the worst
pretty,
part,
don't be too
Annabelle,
attractive.
is they started off with a negative comment. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like she's risen through the ranks and she's done all these amazing things, you know. She's launched markets, she's driven
Yeah.
sales, etc. It was negative because of the way she looks and this, and you sort of think, seriously? And honestly, Annabelle, it's great that you talk about that, because a lot of times as women, I've also heard comments before saying, well, you've done this, however, I'm happy for you, or you've done this, however, the negativity already is the fire that you've poured on, that actually you didn't really acknowledge or are not acknowledging this moment or achievement.
Mm.
That's actually the thing that's fueling the flame. And I mean, interesting. And there are a lot of people who are battling with acne now, you know, through primary
I
school or
still have
secondary school. Yeah.
you know, like definitely post kids. And then obviously you come off, like I wasn't on contraceptive, like the pill anymore. That massively changes your hormone structure. And then obviously, like I don't know if I'm perimenopause, but you're going to get into that phase, which is joyful. And so, you know, your hormones shift again, and, you know, your skin doesn't behave. I'm not one of those girls or people that have had perfect skin. And I still don't to this day. So it's kind of like you're constantly living with that. It doesn't go away. But I would say that definitely is one of the sort of challenges. And I think then the other one, probably major for me, was probably becoming a mum. I think you cannot, like for me, I just couldn't underestimate the impact that was going to have on me. And it's difficult in Hong Kong. The laws there in terms of maternity leave are better than the US. It's typically around 10 to 12 weeks, but it's still not UK system in terms of, like, even though the pay obviously is not great in the UK, it's still not great. And after I had my first son, I had sepsis, so I wasn't medically in a great space, but I literally came back to work 3.5 months after I had my son, I think. And it was for a financial reason only. There was no other reason to come back to work at that point, but financially I needed to. And so, but you realize how much pressure that puts on not just you, but people around you as well, and teams. And actually, the good thing is that Lush changed its maternity policy. So when I had my second child, I could actually take double the length of time off, fully paid, which was great. And so that was just, you know, even just in that 18-month period between baby number one, baby number two, how much of an impact that could potentially have. But I think that shift into being a mum and also being an MD, I just had no idea how that was really going to impact me. And I don't know that I navigated it entirely with grace. I think it was kind of a bit of I'm sure I've made some mistakes along the way. I don't know that there was enough support, like potentially, or I knew where to get support from the right people. And I'd even had a comment about maternity leave being holiday. You know, when you're like,
That's a
I'm,
lie.
s- I was like, what? How is you know, when you're just sort of in that headspace of like, one, I was like recovering from sepsis. So like, I was
Mm.
seriously critically unwell. And then I was like, but I don't feel like it's a holiday. I feel I've never felt more exhausted in my entire life, like just literally. And that kind of comment, you know, of just being like, oh, maternity leave, it's a holiday. I was like, wow, okay. So it kind of shows the difference, I think, of where, you know, where people's understanding maybe had come. And, you know, and it also made me reflect of like, how empathetic, how connected was I to people who had been and had babies before me, and really what they were going through during that process, male or female, you know, when they become parents. And, you know, I don't know. I did reflect on it at that point and think maybe there's more things I could have done as a leader. And I just hadn't really fully understood that journey, I guess.
I think, kudos to you for sharing the story. A lot of the time, as a leader or even as a woman, you do the best you can with what you have at the time. You know, when you think in hindsight of all the things you could do differently or how times have changed, policies are different. At that moment of time, you were doing the best you can with what you had and making those decisions. And a lot of the time, that's what it's going to be. I think as a woman as well, there are no wrong decisions. You know, there are just decisions that you make based on your circumstance, whether it's
Mm.
financial, personal, physical, professional, all of them. And you make the decision and you move in that direction and you keep iterating as you go along. That's why I think it's important to share that for sure.
No, I appreciate it. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think needs more continued support for parents. And I think that's why, you know, the parental leave system here in the UK is obviously significantly better, and it will continue to improve, you know, for future generations too, which is exciting.
Let's talk about your TEDx talk. I'm in awe of TEDx speakers because it is on my bucket list to do one. How did that come about? Tell me about it. And for
Oh,
the audience who haven't listened to it, why that particular powerful message and story?
so Sarah Ashman, who is the CEO of Wolf Olin, so it's a really big consumer agency. She saw me talk at Web Summit the previous year. So I was
In
on,
Portugal.
yeah. No, we weren't in Portugal. Where were we? It was 23. I feel like it was somewhere in Italy. Or maybe it was Portugal. Could have been Lisbon.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Maybe it was. I completely forget. It's a bit of a haze, but I had gone through this kind of like back-to-back sessions of doing keynote speakers and, you know, and our Web Summit. But I remember that I met her and one of her colleagues, and they'd stopped me outside afterwards, after on the main stage, and she was like, "Oh my God, I love your trainers." So I wore these I found the green flash, the apple green from like Nike. They released them on the Nike, on the sneakers app, and then you couldn't get them. And so then I had to pay for like a third party, you know, I don't know where
You
you know,
crazy lady.
yeah, but I love them so much. And so I was in all black and then these very, very bright electric green sneakers. So I guess I stood out so, on that big stage. So anyway, they stopped me afterwards, and I connected with Sarah, and she was fab, and, you know, a great supporter of other women across the business. And she reached out to me last year. They'd actually she does a TEDx event every year basically, and it was the 10th year of her doing TEDx. And so she had reached out to me and said they'd actually had a speaker drop out last minute. So someone who was meant to do a TEDx had dropped out, and she sort of asked me, I think it was like a week or so beforehand, would I step in? And so I was like, sure, why not? I'm always
Of
one of
course
those
I will
people
do
who's
it.
just like, I'll do it. I'll do it. And at the time, you know, you know that it's important, and it was in a small crowd. It's a very intimate space for a TEDx, and you know that it's important. But I'm just one of those people who sometimes like I'll just say yes, and then I can't work it
Panic
through.
afterwards.
I'll panic afterwards and then make it happen. But I really wanted to talk about disruption within beauty. One, because I guess that's been a part of my space with Lush, and being part of a company that is very disruptive in the industry. But secondly, I think Lush is not unique in that sense of like, there's plenty of disruptors in the beauty industry. And I think that's really great, one, to be able to talk about, two, to shout about, because it is hard work trying to disrupt a space. Like, cannot, like even from my small experience of kind of startup with fragrance, it's really hard to change the status quo. And
Mm.
also, to kind of maybe have like, unless you are like Rihanna and you are this kind of powerhouse, you've got
Or
a name
Hailey
and you
Bieber.
kind of can, yeah, you've already got the kind of the following to basically to join charge. But I think it's so important to continue, one, to see these disruptors in the beauty space. Obviously, when Fenty came out with, 40 shades of foundation, setting that new standard in beauty, it was almost like you can't do foundation unless you've got 40 shades. How amazing a change in the cosmetics industry was that. And then, you see these other formats of like Glossier growing from being a community into like and then into a brand. And I still think, regardless of where they end up, I still think that's a super fascinating journey. And then you're seeing, this huge trend around, not wearing makeup. And even, what we talked about earlier about the pressure, I think, for women to be seen as attractive, like, and then you've got people like Pamela Anderson, who probably was at her epitome of career, hugely sexualized and, like very highly made up, to rejecting that kind of that standard, or standard, we should call it. That's probably not the right word to use, but that view, and being like, no, I want to be myself and this is who I am. And look at her today. How cool is that? I mean, I personally am a little bit in love with the love story there with Pamela Anderson and her what is his name, co-star.
Liam Nielsen. Yeah. Yeah. Especially for the way he lost his wife as well,
I
isn't it?
know, so heartbreaking, but I love how authentically connected she is with herself and showing up in that space of being brave enough to be like, because how many women, to be brave enough to be like, I'm not going to wear makeup, or I'm going to wear very little makeup and I'm showing up in this space. Or, Andy McDonald, like, embracing her gray hair, which shouldn't feel radical. It's not radical, but it feels like it in some regards, because obviously, we're sort of pummeled with the adverts from the big companies around, cover your grays and, that's not the standard. This is the standard. Don't. And I think it takes some really brave, courageous moves to seize things in a different light. And I hope that not only continues, but we as both consumers and parts of brands actually continuing to champion and like elevate the voices of those people who are trying to break through things in a different way, because it would be so deathly dull. And I think that's definitely true. Some things have become incredibly deathly dull. It's the same brand in so many different formats. And then you're just like, is there anything different going on here? Like, and so, yeah, I think it's exciting to see. I continue to, I'm looking forward to championing all the brands that are going to come out in the future years that are going to continue to disrupt the norms and challenge how things should be for status quo. And I hope that for myself, I can continue to be a part of that, whether that's part of startup world or part of a bigger brand that's also challenging those formats. I think it's something that I'm quite passionate about.
Do you know, disruption, I think authenticity is what comes through, isn't it? Allowing people to be the best they can be, no matter what they look like, where they've come from. And those are the brands that are winning at the moment. If we see the tragic stories of certain retailers, but actually the shining stars of brands that are accelerating, like you said,
Yeah.
with Glossier, built from community, or whether it's activewear brands or alcohol brands or non-alcohol brands. I think it's a really great time. It's a shift in terms of, especially when I speak to my kids, saying, what brands are you interested in? And it's completely different brands, that I'm discovering online, offline, and it's a good space where disruption is a good sign of authenticity and actually understanding that many brands can exist in different term ways, but that unique selling proposition, I think, is key.
No, it definitely is. And I think being authentic is, especially in today's world, which you are kind of, even content wise, we're using a lot of like AI platforms to help form some of the things that we're doing. And, really, I think that that's a great power pass. It can really power you as a person to be more efficient, but also kind of not dulling down and like blanding yourself. Like something actually quite interesting we talked about at Lush for a period of time. We went, I think businesses went through a phase of blanding. Like, everything just became very vanilla. I
Yeah.
was like, what happened? Like, it's just like, there's no punch, there's no, maybe like the 90s was so kind of like more grunge, it was more punk, and there was more like energy a little bit there. But I think there was a time span where everything just went very uniformed and like just very bland. And I think we're coming back into a time span again of like very colorful, very kind of energetic. And that often brings more disruption anyway. You know, whether or not you look at what's the olive oil brand called? Is it Grazie? Beans with a G. It's in basically what is a like plastic rubberized bottle versus like in the green bottle. I've forgotten what it's called.
No idea.
Begins with a G, but they like really hitting the olive oil industry, and they're kind of disrupting that space. You've got like the gin in the oil can. I can't remember what that brand is called, but you've got there's constant vibes of seeing, you know, brands in different spaces, and you know, and it's great.
Grazza.
It's
Got it here.
Grazza. That's
Yeah, fresh is
amazing.
best, and so on and so forth. Drizzle and sizzle olive oil. There you go.
Drizzle
Yeah.
and sizzle olive oil. Yeah, but they stand out. They stand out
Yeah.
on the retail space, and that wins, especially right now where everything is kind of very like, you know.
Also, do you know, I think it's also brands where they're letting their creative team not go through so many routes of sign off, where they're saying, be creative, be of the moment, be in the consumer moment, cultural moments, and seize the day. I say it with, was it last year? It feels like it was last year. It was with the whole Demure campaign
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
the person went viral. And the brands that seize the moment and turn it into something positive, which obviously helped the person who posted it and so on and so forth. And then there was 6 weeks later where I was receiving emails, I won't name the brand, with subject lines where they were leaning into that. And I was like, mate, you've missed the train. This is like, you weren't in the moment. And that probably is because they needed sign off. They needed, to have some perfect creative to go with it. And the ones that just said, right, we're going with the audience, we're going with the moment, are the ones that actually that built up from that.
I definitely agree. We had a bit of an example of that. Saltburn, which was a
Yes.
movie that came out on Prime, right? So one of the PRs in the team had basically said that she wanted to do Salt Bomb, which was basically a bath bomb based on that bath scene. So like a salty and it was such a thing where it was like, at first it was like, kind of conversation. I'm like, oh, you serious? You really want to do that? Okay. So we basically took it to the MD, and he was like, well, if you're willing to stake your career on Annabelle, it's your problem if it doesn't. And I was like, sure, let's just go for it. Like, who knows where it will go? But you knew it's one of those cultural moments. And the copy, I cannot remember her name, Georgia, I think was her name, who wrote the copy. And it was basically come and relax or vice versa. I mean, absolute copy gold.
Spot on,
and you could get away with it with a within Lush, but it was actually the copy that ended up going viral on TikTok. So the ecom team had done an amazing job to make sure that the pages were shareable directly into social. So people were literally just being like, oh my God. And then the team who were doing collabs had kind of like created this great photo shoot recreating the scene from the film. So it just looked, it was 10 out of 10 in terms of speed. It was like a week basically to kind of get that out the door, but it's exactly that, get those cultural moments and move on them super fast. And that means not heavy layers of approval and so forth, like through a business, to be able to move as fast as you can. I mean, I think the Cat's Eye campaign, although won't have been a response to American Eagle, the timing was absolutely spot on.
Yeah, and also a good way to reinvent Gap, which is,
Yes.
they've gone through some trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
Tapping into that new audience as well. Genius.
Agree. And that's what I also love, actually, to be honest. Brands don't die. People kind of can like die within, but brands don't actually really die. They can always be reinvented. And I think that there's always an opportunity for a comeback. And actually, sometimes people love nothing more than a comeback.
Let's talk about you, the brand. So you're now no longer at Lush. You've done some amazing things and a great story there. I think lots of tidbits of information you've shared, which are helping our women founders or people looking for next tips, I think is really good. You've now embraced yourself in the startup world. Why has that been important to you, and why is that an important next step in terms of going that direction?
I think I was always intrigued about what it would look like to set up my own business. And then obviously when you're part of a business that's so entrepreneurial and the founders are so heavily involved, it's hard not to kind of be in that sphere of like, oh, what would it be like if I set something up? And what would I set up if I did something? And I think I'd always been challenged a lot by my friends being like, you really should have your own business. Like you should do something. I just hadn't had like, that burning idea where someone goes, that's exactly the product I want to create. And I, want to do that. And then I was contacted by someone over LinkedIn who was looking for someone to join him within the fragrance space. And did I have an opinion? And I actually did have, and when I thought about it, I was like, no, I do have an opinion about fragrance. I hate the commitment culture that exists around fragrance in the fragrance industry, like large sizes, this whole signature scent piece, the idea that you're just one thing and that you'll buy into that, and that you, the consumer, will like be quite happy with the fact that you're buying a product that's going to last you 18 months and you haven't even decided whether or not you really like it or not. Like that doesn't exist in any other cosmetics category. And it just didn't, it doesn't make sense to me as a consumer. And also I was just never one of those people who had a signature scent. I like lots of different things. I wanted to switch it up and I wanted to create a brand that was way more about like fluidity, freedom, but also enabling fragrance to be part of your own self-identity, but also empowering that identity through, who you choose to be on that day. In the same way that we look at whether that's fashion or makeup or any other extension of accessories that we use in our life to make us feel like, yeah, we've got it together. We're smashing this today. And I think that was kind of a big part of it. And I've learned a lot on the journey. I've learned what I like, what I don't like as part of that journey. And I think there's a huge difference, I think, which people don't realize with startups, or I hadn't maybe naively realized with startups, in terms of like having funding early on versus not having funding and bootstrapping. Like those two experiences are hugely different. And, how do you want to grow your business and your brand? Do you want to grow it via Meta? Like, do you want to play, drive that whole company through there? Or do you want to build an organic business, build a community, and then leverage that community through paid channels? All of those things start becoming, what do you value? How do you even want to kind of build a company? And then I think there's a kind of realization of like, oh, okay, I actually do know what I would want to do if the business was 100% myself. And then you start thinking about, okay, well, how does that kind of look in its current context? And is that right for me or not? And so I think for startup founders, what I wished I had kind of maybe had a bit more knowledge of, or maybe just a bit more awareness of, is like, which is obvious, but I think when you think about the people you involve in the business, early days is so important. Like I knew that when I started up Hong Kong, like the Hong Kong part of the business for Lush, those first 10 hires are so pivotal. But I think in startup world, it's almost like the first one, just number one, like the first
Oh,
person other than
yeah,
yourself. That's all that matters. Anyone
exactly.
else. If you
Yeah.
can't get your team to function, if you can't function as more than one person, if you're going to be co-founders or whatever that might be, like, however you work that, that's kind of like number one. I went and I was at a talk recently with the founders from Butternut Box, which are like the guys that have built which is like 210 million ARR now, like as a
You know
dropship,
what?
which is
It's so
incredible
interesting with that
business.
because do you remember a few years back? It's probably after COVID and the pandemic, where people said subscription boxes, this is the end of it. People are not
Yeah.
interested in it anymore. Obviously, a few brands had to then probably their sales went down, but it was more about changing and understanding how people were eating at the time. So to see that actually they're still successful is really good. And actually, there are more subscription brands out there.
Wasn't at all. It was a small, intimate, like one of our investors had invited them along to talk in a morning session. Hugely beneficial, but you realise the partnership that they had was so integral to the starting point of their journey. It was like
Mm.
they were best friends. They were kind of like, the first thing they did on a Monday morning was spend 2 hours with each other. They worked, they were in the same geographic location. They were building that network and that relationship because
Did
it's
they
all
grow up together?
no, they basically, I think they met at Goldman Sachs or one of
Um,
those financial institutions. I think it's Goldman,
yeah.
but I could be wrong. And I think they just had this partnership that felt natural, authentic, you could kind of buy into, but equally as well, hugely supportive during
Mm.
times where you will be no more stressed and stretched than you will during a startup. So you've got like you really got to sort of like, in those really dark hours, or when you're like, why am I doing this to myself? What am I doing? You need a person there, who's going to be the other side of that, who can lift you and you can lift each other. When you're looking for a co-founder, that would be what you've got to look for. It's got to be that partnership together where it's like we know we can work together well. We know who we are as individuals, and we know that we're complementary in our skill set. And we also know that when we're under pressure, we can support, take off from the other, add in when needed. And those are the sorts of things that you kind of really want to. So I think there's a whole magnitude of like how you can set up a business if you're a single founder like yourself, like, doing the business yourself versus having a co-founder. And then on top of those decisions, or multiple co-founders, if you take Lush as an example, there's 7 of them, 8. And then and then do I take investment and capital early on if you can get it, you know? And then the reality of being a woman and being like, well, only VCs only give 2% of the funds to women anyway. So if you're going to have a
So you're
co-founder,
bootstrapped anyway.
you're bootstrapped unless you've got a guy on the board. But how difficult is that conversation? The reality of like, if you've got, and even I remember Emily Weiss said from Glossier, no one would fund Glossier
Or
for her
Canva.
until she had like a female founder, like didn't she put in 1 million, and then she got the rest of the funding. And that it is so eye-opening, but it is something that you need to understand, especially if you're a female founder. I hate to say it, but yeah, if you want to get capital raised, you probably want a male co-founder alongside of you.
Yeah. And I guess, you know what, everything that you've said is taking the emotion out of it. Because talking about these 2 co-founders who met at Goldman Sachs, they had worked together before and had become friends afterwards. I think there's a lot of the stories that I'm hearing are similar, where they've understood how they each operate in a business setting, which allows them to say, okay, now I can also have pizza with you
Yeah.
afterwards because you've seen me at my, I don't know, my most stressful, my most critical, under pressure in terms of business decisions, and then taking that to then build a business together. Whereas a lot of the time when you see some businesses where it was, I don't know, they were married first and started a business, they ended up going that way
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, those are the fundamentals, isn't it? Where you've basically seen each of the different ways businesses come together and at which part you would like to be part of a business. Have you then determined what your sweet spot is of
Yeah,
where you would help?
I think for me, like if I was going to do another startup, I would do it 100% myself. I would bootstrap it, and I would be building, community, and then leverage it further from there. And I think for me, in terms of like, supporting like other businesses, like that's always kind of a fun thing to do kind of on advisory. But I'm one of those people who loves I love problem solving.
Mm.
So I love a puzzle. Like I'm one of those people who sit down. I cannot leave until the puzzle's done, regardless of how big it is. So if I'm sitting here for 7 hours, I'm doing that puzzle because I can't leave it unfinished. Like it's really like it really bugs me. So I love looking at big challenges. And so that can be for a small startup, or it can be for a big company, especially when like maybe I love a turnaround. I love moving things off in a different way. And I like supporting companies that I think have something more to them than just I want to make money, which is like there's part of a culture that they're trying to be part of, or values that they bring through. So whether that's, like a Lush type company or a Body Shop, or like other types of businesses that are trying to do different things in their space, or like change things like Fenty and Glossier. I think those are the disruptive beauty players is kind
Mm.
of the businesses that I would love to help, I think, kind of moving forward. But yeah, I definitely, for me, I've definitely called it out. If I do another iteration of a startup, where would I go? That would definitely be it. And then I think also just really understanding, the equity and the cap tables, and dilution, and really control. And ultimately, if you want to create something and you want it to be yours, you need to control it. And if you don't, It's not yours. So
Yeah.
as well,
And it's a
just kind of,
decision, isn't it?
yeah,
It's a decision you're making as a founder. I believe Bobby Brown had, when she sold her business to Estee Lauder,
yeah.
she had, I think 20 or 30 years where she
Yeah,
could
she
not see
did.
her own
20, 30
business.
years. Yeah.
It's crazy, but she was okay with it. And now I think it's called Jones Road that
Jones
she
Road.
started. But there are all these things where you need to be happy with the decision that you've made at the time and understand what that means. So if it's giving up ownership or just sitting back and letting the check roll in and letting others make the decision, or I want to keep ownership, it's all things to consider, which, like you said, they don't teach you in secondary school. We're having now to use ChatGPT, podcasts, our networks to get this information, which hope should help other women out there in these journeys.
Yeah. And I think equally, like when you're looking at those journeys of like, into startup, is like, really, why do you want to? Because it is a really hard journey, like startup life. It's like, I thought I really understood that being part of a kind of more entrepreneurial business. The retail was the dominant force of, obviously, of everything. There was mail
And
order and
purely organic.
catalogs, and purely organic. And that's not the play. Like, you know, historically you would look at comms, and you would look at comms on maybe five things, and now you look at comms and you're like, oh my god, how many different communication channels? Because especially now with the growth of AI, you need, you're not just looking at SEO, you need to be looking at how that interspaces with Claude, with ChatGPT, Perplexity. Like, you can't be sleeping on the fact that the customer is moving all the time.
Mm.
And so that reality, and also into, when you look at that from a global perspective, it's very, very, very different. Major channel or a major player in one market is completely different in another. If you don't have that, locked in for for the markets where you want to do as, you can't have this kind of one size fits all approach. You've really got to build in the cultural nuances, which makes business more expensive. Like, that is the reality. It makes business more expensive to run. And more expensive to acquire a customer today than it did even like 2 or 3 years ago. I just mean the cost of acquisition during COVID was super cheap.
Also, people took more risks because I think it was, we have to be agile right now. We don't know what's going to
Yeah.
happen in 2 months or 3 months.
Well,
So
yeah, no, we
decisions
didn't even know
were
what was
made.
happening next day.
Yeah, and I think that was a good time for, I watch Shark Tank a lot, and you see businesses that grew during the pandemic, or areas or sectors that thrived, or technologies that just accelerated, and they're still here today, is because
Mm,
they took those chances. And now obviously the consumers pivoted. We all want experience. We all want to go and touch and feel things. How do you pivot from that to make sure that you can join the two together? I still feel fundamentals of being agile is still key, and make decisions
yeah.
is important.
Make decisions quickly,
Yeah.
fail fast, and move on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So what's front of mind for you right now? You've amassed an impressive career. You've summed it up in terms of you love problem solving, attention to detail, understanding the story. I'm trying to read you right now, but what's front of mind for you in terms of a personal goal or initiative or shift of where you want to go directionally?
Think it's an interesting question, actually, to be honest. I've looked at like it in a few different ways. Like, I think something I feel like I hadn't really realized was when I left Lush, how much of your identity is attached to the place that you're at,
Mm.
um, and how dangerous that can be, actually, which you don't realize, but it actually is. Or at least it was for me. In the essence of, like, I stepped out and then I was like, who am I? Who's Annabelle outside of Lush? Because for so long it had been Annabelle at Lush. And, I was there 26 years. That's like even wild to think about in terms of, like, I was there. It's a very long period of time. And so I think one of the things that I'm really focused on now is building that identity more around, and I would say this for future people, for younger people, but also anyone in a career thinking, is like, you're more than the company that you work for. You're not just an employee, and you have to build, probably more so today than any other time, build that around. But it's not just also the work. Like, I've always been incredibly passionate, particularly around human rights, and treating people correctly. I mean, natural disasters was one of the things I was super passionate about, which sounds crazy, but actually supporting people after a natural disaster has occurred.
Mm.
And then so I'm looking at more in my space, a headspace of thinking, okay, if I was going to pivot careers or if I was going to look at something different, or I want to look at something alongside of working within the FMCG category, like I want to start looking at those things again in terms of whether that's charitable work and organizations, either in the NED, like NED capacity, but also just really getting into that headspace of thinking about what really matters to me. Because sometimes I think we can go along with a lot of like doing what matters for someone else. You get asked to do something, you do it. You get asked to do something, you do it. And then sometimes you can kind of be like, I've just been on a hamster wheel. Like, and I haven't got off, and now I've got off the hamster wheel and I don't know what direction I'm going because I'm like blindsided by the spinning. And I think that definitely, I think the younger generation, definitely my kids' generation, maybe even your children, mine are a bit younger, but I can see them. They're going to be the generation of entrepreneurs. Gen Alpha are definitely the generation of entrepreneurs. They are not going to want to work for people necessarily as inherently as we have done, as like definitely for me as millennials. It's like I'm going to get a job and I'm going to be an employee. I wish someone at 20 had really sat me down and been like, there's another pathway here, and here's how you do it. Because I think that's the opportunity, and I'm so excited for that generation, I think, coming through. But also it's not too late and you can continue to do those things even now, but it's exciting to get those guys started and thinking in that way. But for me, definitely, I think it's kind of continuing to explore really what do I really get, what do I care about? Well, I know what, those areas, but like, let's get involved in them and let's kind of be part of them. And also like, I love the idea of waking up in the morning and love what I'm doing. I did and I have done for like 27 years, and I want to kind of like continue doing that. So it's finding the space and the companies that you can be a part of that you feel like you can really make a difference in. And so for me, yeah, organizations that are looking at turnaround, that are in trouble potentially or disruptive, would be the organizations I probably would most want to work with, alongside of working in probably more on the human rights piece. But I do think identity is something that, I don't know, even in my 40s, I feel like people don't really talk about, but I do feel like, especially in your 40s, maybe this is also a thing that happens, is that I feel like you have to let go of your youth. No one talks to you really about that. I don't feel like, maybe my parents, my mum never did, but I feel like the 40s is really like, because once you get to 50, there's no passing off thinking that you're like in that kind of younger subset. That time has gone. But in your 40s, there's a part of you that still clings on to that idea of being into that younger generation. And then when I speak to my friends who are in their 50s, they're like, oh my God, you can't wait till you get here. Trust me, because you really aren't going to give two things about a lot of it, and it's great. But I think I'm also in that kind of crux of like that that time period, which I think can also be a bit of a challenge for people, particularly women, because obviously of the hormonal things outside of that. But I think it's exciting also to continue to kind of reinvest and reinvent yourself. And I just love the fact that every day can be a learning day. What better day to continue learning?
And I feel like it's coming back full circle to the things you're passionate about. You talked about geography and human geography, people, your core values and ethics about, really wanting to be there for the things that are happening in the world. It's like a full circle moment that's happening for you, isn't it? That interest that you had when you're younger, that was intrinsic in you, is going to be the guiding force for what you do next. And yeah, embracing the honestly, it's the I don't give a shit period is
I wasn't going to use that word, so I wasn't sure if I could swear, but like,
it's fine.
Okay, that's good. That's good. No, I love that, and I absolutely agree. And that's the fun bit, and also just having fun. Like, life is way too serious, and it is for a lot of very good reasons. But for yourself, for your own like mental health, you need to have fun.
Annabelle, we end the podcast with the Trailblazer takeaway tips. Usually people share 3. But if there was one piece of advice, obviously hindsight is an interesting thing. We want to motivate and inspire the women out there. What would your takeaway tips be?
I think my main one would be like, just don't settle. Don't settle for less than you are. I think there's a large part, you get kind of told to kind of almost like dull your spirit, dull your energy, like in some part. And I think where I've excelled, where I've been at the best version of myself, is when I've been most connected authentically to who I am and to what I do and what I do best. And that means, not settling and being that voice in the room, sometimes even when it's the uncomfortable voice that's kind of shining a light on something that's kind of maybe not where it needs to be. And so Yeah, don't hesitate to stand up for yourself, to do something that's different. And if you need someone to back you, message me. Find me on LinkedIn. I'll do it.
Love it. Annabelle, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been nice to see the thread of how we started talking about your career and where you worked and pivoting really to it being about you. You know, your courage, your clarity, your connection. You've got some vision and some great ideas. So I'm really looking forward to see what you do next. Where can everyone find you on the internet, on the socials?
LinkedIn predominantly. That's where I'm at for now. So come find me on LinkedIn. Maybe I should set up a Substack actually. Maybe that'll be
I
next
think
thing.
that would be good. And also check out Annabelle's TEDx talk as well. We'll put the link in the show notes. For everyone who's been listening, thank you so much. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep trailblazing.